Imagine walking down the street and seeing something that makes your blood boil. A woman in a wheelchair, vulnerable, alone, and visibly struggling, is surrounded by two police officers who seem less interested in helping her than in intimidating her. Now picture this woman is wearing a worn leather vest with the Hells Angels patch stitched across the back, her story written in every crease of her jacket. This was not just any day, and this was not just any woman. And the man who stepped forward to defend her. He had no idea his single act of courage would bring 250 roaring bikers down the highway in her honor. Stick with this story until the end, because you'll want to hear how it unfolds. And trust me, if this story touches you, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because stories like this deserve to be remembered. It began on a chilly afternoon in a small town where not much usually happens. Jack, a single father and veteran, was out grabbing groceries when he heard raised voices. He followed the sound and saw the two officers standing over the woman in the wheelchair. She was tough. You could tell by the tattoos on her arms and the sharpness in her eyes, but she was clearly in pain. Her legs trembled from an old injury, and she struggled to keep her chair steady. The officers accused her of loitering, muttering things under their breath, almost daring her to talk back. Jack's gut twisted. He knew that look. He'd seen it overseas when people in power leaned too hard on those with none. At first, he hesitated. Confronting the cops could mean trouble. But then the woman tried to roll forward, and one officer placed his boot casually against her wheel, blocking her path. That was it. Jack dropped his grocery bags, stepped forward, and planted himself between the officers and the woman. "That's enough," he said firmly, his voice steady but sharp. "She's not hurting anyone. She doesn't need your harassment." The cops sneered. "You don't know who you're defending," one spat. Jack stood taller. "Doesn't matter. I know she's a human being. That's enough for me." The officers grumbled, threatened him with obstruction charges, but eventually backed off when a small crowd began to gather, watching closely. The woman in the wheelchair lifted her chin. She didn't say much then, just nodded to Jack, her eyes filled with something deeper than gratitude. Jack thought that was the end of it. He wheeled her across the street, bought her a coffee, and listened as she finally introduced herself. Her name was Maria, and she wasn't just any Hell's Angel. She had been part of the Brotherhood for years before a terrible accident left her paralyzed. Though she couldn't ride anymore, her biker family never abandoned her. "You didn't just stand up for me," she said quietly, "you stood up for all of us." Jack shrugged it off, saying anyone with a conscience would have done the same. But Maria's eyes said she knew better. She told him to keep his phone close. He didn't understand then, but a couple of hours later, as the sun dipped low, the sound came first. A deep rumble on the horizon, like thunder rolling across the land. Jack turned and saw them, rows upon rows of motorcycles, headlights gleaming, chrome shining, leather jackets glowing red in the sunset. 250 bikers, Hell's Angels from across the state, roaring into town. They came not in anger, but in solidarity. Maria sat at the front, lifted by her brothers and sisters, and when she pointed at Jack, every single rider gave him a nod of respect. The sight was overwhelming. People poured out of shops, filming with their phones, cheering as the bikers filled the street. The cops who had harassed Maria earlier, nowhere to be seen. Jack stood there, caught between disbelief and awe, as Maria wheeled herself forward and raised his hand into the air. "This man," she shouted over the roar of engines, "stood when I couldn't. He showed courage when others walked by. And now, we stand for him." The bikers revved their engines in unison, a sound so powerful it shook the ground. Jack felt tears sting his eyes. For years he had struggled quietly, feeling invisible as a veteran, as a father trying to rebuild a life. And now, here he was, embraced by a family he never knew he needed. That night, the Hells Angels invited him to their clubhouse. They shared food, laughter, and stories under dim lights and the smell of oil and leather. Maria leaned close and whispered, "Sometimes one small act of courage starts a fire that no one can put out." Jack left with more than just memories. He left with a sense of belonging, with friends who would have his back, and with a renewed faith that doing the right thing, even when it's scary, creates ripples bigger than we ever imagined. So, if you're watching this right now, remember this: it only takes one person to step forward. One voice to say, "That's enough." And when you do, you never know who will stand with you, who will show up when you least expect it. If this story touched you, hit that like button and subscribe, because the world needs more people brave enough to defend what's right.